Hello and welcome back to the 8-Bit Guy. In this episode, I'm going to attempt to build a case for my mini pet. In a previous episode, I did a build and review of the mini pet, which is a current product made from all off-the-shelf parts, which when assembled will give you a fully functional Commodore pet. Now, I wasn't thrilled with the keyboard though, so I ended up building my own, and since then I've had the mini pet set up on my desk and have used it almost daily for testing of the game that I've been developing. And to be honest, it's a little annoying having a board just sitting on the desk like this, so I started thinking about building a case for it. Now, I thought about making it from sheet metal like the original pet, but this proved to be quite challenging, although I did come up with some concept designs. Then I thought about putting it in some sort of existing PC case, but then the same problem kept popping up, which is I'd have to build something custom for the keyboard itself. But then one day it occurred to me that the pet keyboard would theoretically fit inside of a Commodore 64 case, as you can see, but it would require dremeling the case up to make it fit. Of course, I have no desire to cut up an original Commodore 64 case, plus I'm sure there'd be a lot of angry people if I did such a thing, but the good news is you can still buy brand new Commodore 64 cases. Now this particular one was donated to me by Bo Zimmerman for the explicit purpose of cutting up for this. Now yeah, this is actually a brand new 64 case made from the original molds, and I think it was made just a year or two ago. However, Chris, the guy that's doing my 3D printing for me, said that it would probably be easier to color match if we had a black case. Now he just happened to have a black case that he was already using, but he offered to trade me for Bo's case. So this is that actual case that we're going to be using. So I'm going to get to cutting this thing up. One thing Chris wanted was for me to save the badge. Now I'm not sure what this is made of, as I think it's an aftermarket badge. So one technique that can be used to avoid bending or creasing a metal badge is to use fishing wire, or in this case, dental floss. And there's good reason to remove this because, for one, it won't be a Commodore 64 anymore. And the second reason is I'm going to have to cut the plastic right through the middle of this. And while the dental floss was working, it was going slow. And I eventually realized this badge was very flexible, so there's probably no point in even using this method. And I wound up just pulling it off like this. And then, of course, applying it to the other case. There we go. So my friend Chris came over and he had already been experimenting with 3D printing some mounts in a standard Commodore case, and so this gave me an idea of where all the ports were going to end up, so I knew where to cut. Of course, these mounts won't actually work for the final product because the whole board needs to move backwards about a centimeter, which can't happen until the case is cut up. Of course, this is the case we're actually going to cut up. Now, I started by marking the places that I wanted to cut with a Sharpie. Now, the idea here was that I wanted to cut the least amount possible, but I also wanted to leave some sort of vertical support in the back. So we'll keep the spot between the video and serial ports as structural support. So this spot here is where the user port will go, and this spot here is where the cassette port will go. And here we go. Okay, so the user port section is all done. Now time to file down the cassette port area. And here we go. The rear modifications are complete. However, for Chris's design to work, we need to lower these screw stocks by just a bit. These currently measure 5.81 millimeters, but we need to remove around 2 millimeters of height, and for that, the easiest way is probably just to file them down some. And now we have 3.74 millimeters, which should be fine. And now, for the hard part, I need to figure out how this keyboard's going to fit. Obviously, I'm trying to compromise between getting the keyboard as centered as possible in the case, while also cutting the least amount of plastic possible. So what I decided to do was cut into the case over here. And just like the rear pieces, I wanted to purposefully cut too little away. I'd rather have to come back with a file to get the last millimeter than to accidentally cut too much. And here goes the big chunk between that separates the function keys. This is the largest piece of plastic I'll be removing. And here's where I'm cutting into that section where the badge was. And there we go. And now, of course, to come back and file everything down, the filing actually takes longer than the Dremel. And once all done, it's time to clean the keyboard up a little bit. And now for a test fit. Does it fit? Yeah, I think it's going to work fine. At this point, I sent the case and keyboard home with Chris, who would spend the next few days designing and 3D printing pieces to hold everything in place. Unfortunately, he had to remove the keys. He's experimenting with a top layer of parts that add strength to the board, and of course a variety of little parts to mount the board to the case. A few days later, I got it back with the board already installed on his custom mounts, and he's even wired up some of the switches and ports and stuff. These will need to be soldered to the board though. On the side here, we've got a nice power switch and a reset button. On the back, this is the new power port and the video port. And of course, here's our 3 card edge connectors. As for the keyboard, well, I have a jigsaw puzzle of parts here. Before I could do anything, I'd have to remove the keys once again. Okay, so this goes on here like so. I'm guessing he would have done the whole thing in one piece, but his 3D printer probably couldn't make parts that big. This grid piece goes on the bottom, and there won't be a lot of clearance for the wires, so I'm going to use this ribbon cable. It's pretty much the only way because I won't be able to see the solder points after the brackets are installed. Fortunately, a ribbon cable keeps all the wires in order, so I won't have to see where they're attached. Alright, so I've separated and stripped the ends of the wires, but this is still a real pain to do. I really need like 3 hands to do this. But since I only have 2, I just poke a few wires through at a time, and then cover them with some electrical tape to hold them in place. And then I can solder from the other side. And since my eyesight has gotten terrible for seeing close objects, I have to follow up each solder joint with a magnifying glass to double check that it's good. And then of course I can cut off the extra wire. And here we are, finally all finished. I did have to use another small piece of ribbon cable because I was short 3 wires. So what about the other end of this ribbon cable? Well, originally I thought I would solder it directly to the mini-pet, but I decided it might be best to keep the ability to disconnect the keyboard, so I'm using the same pin header from the original project, only this time I'm covering the connections with heat shrink. Okay, so what I need to do now is take the board out because I need to solder the power right here into that little spot. And then this is for the reset button, and it has to go right over here and connect to the reset switch. But yeah, all that needs to be soldered from the underside, so I'm going to have to take this board off. It's very handy that this board has solder points for power. This saves me the trouble of having to desolder the barrel jack or try to find a matching barrel connector. The reset button is a different story. I don't want to mess with desoldering it, and so I think the easiest thing will be to just solder the wires right to the bottom of it here like this. Yeah, that'll actually work just fine. Okay, so all done with that. I can reinstall the board now. I can just plug the video cable in here, and so that's really all there is to the bottom part. Now I need to figure out this jigsaw puzzle of keyboard pieces. So skipping ahead a bit, I have the keyboard pieces all assembled, and here's what it looks like all put together. Now I'll attach the keyboard to the little header there, and then this should mount just like a regular keyboard in a 64C case. Yeah, it slides right in there like so. And then there are just 2 screws at the top. And now I get to reattach all these keys. And here comes the big question. Does the top case fit correctly? And yeah, I think it does. Okay, time to plug it in and test it out. All we need is power and video. And now I finally have a power switch on the mini-pet, something I complained about in the last video about it. And it works. Unfortunately, the brightness on the TV is too high, which is overexposing the camera, but it works. Before I can demonstrate much else, I need to get my SD to PET adapter working, and the device itself fits just fine. Unfortunately, the cassette port does not. This is only needed for 5-volt power, but it is nevertheless needed. However, a regular Commodore dataset actually fits fine in this spot, so the best solution here is to trim the wings off of the connector. I'll again turn to my handy Dremel for that. So, let's try this again. Yeah, seems to fit fine now. I've got the brightness turned down on the TV a bit this time. This makes my camera much happier, as you can see. So I thought I'd give Petsky Robots a test. One irritating problem, though, is that the screen is still not centered, and that's something I also complained about before. Well, I do have a solution for this. My TV has a service menu, and I even attached a label to the back to remind me how to get to it. Unfortunately, it does turn the brightness way up when inside the menu, but the main thing is I just need to adjust the horizontal centering. And there we go. That looks a lot better. You know, the funny thing is, playing this here like this, you might almost be able to fool somebody into thinking it was a Commodore 64 simply connected to a black and white TV. While typing in some basic programs, I kept thinking something wasn't quite right with the keyboard, and then I realized that I had the J and K keys on backwards, so no problem, I'll just pull those off and fix them. And one last thing, I think this computer deserves a name, so I designed a little badge, and I made it up in white letters just like the 64C, only I'm calling this one the Petsky 4. I made the badge to fit what little area was left of the original badge location. And you know, there's a certain irony here. Commodore actually produced both the Educator 64 and the PET 4064, which were both Commodore 64 boards inside of a PET case. And now I've done the exact opposite and put a PET board inside of the Commodore 64 case, and I don't think that's ever been done before. So this conversion isn't perfect, and for one thing, the LED doesn't work. However, I can probably get it working eventually. I just need to find the proper resistor value and then wire it into the board. Also, I kind of messed up the case here in this spot by accident when I was dremeling. It doesn't hurt anything, but it doesn't look all that great. And of course, originally, Chris and I had talked about trying to fill in these areas on either side of the spacebar and between the number pad here so that it would be flush with the top of the case. And that was the main reason for going with a black case to begin with, but it proved to be just too much trouble. Still, I can't complain too much. I think overall this project worked out really well. One drawback of this project, though, is how much money it costs. I mean, you could probably buy a real PET for the same cost as building this device, but on the bright side for me, both the board and the case were donated, so my cost is not nearly as much as it would be for the average person. Still, you can't deny that this is considerably more portable than a regular PET, and definitely easier to store as well. And since I have another PET game in the works, this is probably going to spend a lot of time on my desk over the next year or so. Oh, and while we're on the topic of pets, if you haven't seen the new Wonder Woman 1984 movie, which granted it's not like the best Wonder Woman movie ever, but there's a lot of pets in the movie, and it's worth seeing the movie just for that. Now, there is one other thing I wanted to mention about this project. So Chris, the guy that did the 3D printing for me, he has put the designs up on Thingiverse so that you can download those, and I will put a link down in the description for you. So if you want to build your own one of these, I guess you could if you've got access to a 3D printer. Now, the way that would be best to do a project like this would be if we could get the guys over at, and I'm probably not going to say this right, it's either Tynemouth or Tinmouth or Tinmouth or Tynemouth or something like that. Anyway, the guys that make the Mini-PET board. Now, if we could get them to build a board that has the same footprint of a Commodore 64 board, that we would just fit naturally into a case like this without any modifications. Now, that would be the best way to do it. And then, of course, likewise with the keyboard, if we get somebody to make a keyboard that's PET compatible but has more or less the same footprint as a C64 board, that would require either little to no modification to get that to work as well. So that would be the ideal way to do a project like this, but that's probably a pipe dream and probably never going to happen. Anyway, I've at least got mine now, even if it wasn't the easiest way to get it done. But anyway, that about wraps it up. So as always, thanks for watching.